Okay, well, welcome, Pam.
Hello.
How are you?
Good, thank you. And you?
Excellent. I'm very well, thank you. Thank you very much for taking the time to be with us. And I would like you to tell us a little bit about yourself, your experience in teaching.
Okay, sure. Well, firstly, thank you for having me. It's my pleasure to be here. And what can I tell you? I am an English teacher and I've been in the English as a second language industry for, oh goodness, anyway, over 20 years. And I started out in Australia, which is where I'm from, teaching English to study tour students who would come over from Japan and want to have a holiday in Australia. And I was the young teacher who would go with them and show them around and explain things. And from that, my position grew. Eventually, I ended up as the director of studies at a school in Brisbane, Australia. Um, Wonderful school. If you ever go to Australia, I recommend Lexus. And I worked there, I think in total for 5 or 6 years. And then my partner, who is Japanese, and I decided that for our future, we wanted to open our own business. So we both moved to Japan and we opened an English school just outside Tokyo. And that was a school for adults who wanted to learn conversational English. And it developed and grew. At its peak, we had 4 schools in Tokyo and surrounding. And then 2 years ago, we decided to sell it because, as often happens to business owners, it became too stressful. And now we are trying things online. So I'm focusing on teaching conversational English to adults again, or teenagers online.
Excellent. That's how I met you and I saw
Yeah,
you. And if you don't know Pam's site on Instagram, it is
sure. It's uh, Neo English with Pam, and that's the same handle on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok. So I'm on all of them.
excellent. Yes, I saw her there and I said, I reached out to Pam and I asked her, would you be willing to have a chat with me and maybe help some learners and teachers with tips and just talk about our experiences? And she was more than happy to do so. And that's why we have her here today. And just to talk a little bit about myself, for those who don't know me, well, I'm Mayra Tamayo, and I've been an ESL teacher for over 30 years. I've had English academies. I've also had leadership positions. I am about to launch my first book. It'll come out on January 19th, and it's precisely on how to improve your English level with confidence. So I think that this conversation can also help those learners who are just starting or that are halfway there and feel a little bit stuck, or that they want to perfect their English that are more advanced, and or teachers like Lisana and Evelyn that maybe they could use with their students. So Evelyn, can you tell us a little bit about your experience?
Yeah, sure. Well, I in I studied English teaching in college, and languages is something that I've been really passionate about. I worked as an English teacher in an academy, and right now I'm the principal of a school program in the street light in the red light, sorry, district. Although we don't really focus on what's English teaching specifically, it's in the teaching area. And overall, yeah, I love English and just teaching it as well. So I would like to just also get back into that and still grow in that area, even though specifically teaching the language is not something that I'm doing right now. But yeah.
Thank you. And Lisana?
Hi.
Hi.
Hi again. Well, first of all, congratulations on both of you for your passion and experience and doing this session to share information for the ones that are starting in this field. Um, well, my experience is it's it, it's around 3 years now. I started this year around April with my virtual classes. Um, and it was, as I mentioned before, it was something that came out of surviving mode, but it was probably there, and maybe life just said, well, this is the time. If you're not gonna do it, you're not gonna do it never. So just go ahead and do it. And I really would like to grow in this field. I've noticed some students that have grown with me during this year. And well, currently I'm teaching A1 level. I'm not going any further. Um, I was teaching in the professional field. Um, I was teaching an engineer how can he be fluent and have better conversations and better presentations in his area, and he's doing great now. Um, but right now I only have one student. I am teaching her at a B1 level, but I have to, so what I have to do is to study. Mayra, with her coaching, she helped me a lot, but I do have to plan my classes very strictly before having a class with her. So as well, honestly, as I'm I'm gaining experience while I'm teaching, and I think it's this is a very fulfilling career for me as well, because I've been also learning
Mhm.
from things that I was I'm working also on my own vocabulary and analyzing the grammar, etc., etc. So yeah, this is some of my experience so far.
Excellent. And it's funny
Thank you.
you should say that, Lisana, because we were just, well, before the session started, Pam and I were talking precisely about that. That
Yeah.
as teachers, it doesn't matter if you're just starting or if you don't feel that confident about your grammar, that when you start teaching, it's actually the best way to perfect your own grammar, because
Yeah.
it requires preparation. And then while you simplify and you teach it, sometimes you start realizing, oh, now I get it. Now I see how it's used, or now I understand it, or now because I simplified it for my student, then it's even easier. Or you can find ways to simplify it for them if it's too complex in a course book or something like that. Right, Pam?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, Lisana, Myra and I were talking about how, English is a little different to Spanish in the sense that, I grew up without learning grammar at school. Well, very little, very little. I think I learned what a noun and a verb was, and that was about it for grammar in the English classrooms in Australia. And that's pretty common for English native speakers. So when we go into teaching English, we're crazily studying grammar textbooks the night before each class to try and make sure that we know what to do. So
Yeah.
if you feel any lack of confidence in your grammar, for example, you are not alone. This is something I think everyone has to teach themselves in order to be able to teach it well.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Well,
it's like a very philosophic topic, right? When we talk about grammar, because I've had those kind of classes with students when we read articles and then we talk about it in class, and it turns out like a very philosophical class talking
Oh,
about,
really?
yeah, at the end, yeah, it sounds like very philosophical, talking about what if we use this with that, and maybe the linking words are also the connectors, and we go like analyzing the
Yeah.
topics.
Yeah, well, this is it, isn't it? Because English grammar isn't so cut and dried usually. There's usually exceptions. There's usually something you can play with. So yeah, I see what you mean.
Mhm.
Wow.
Pam, what have you found are some of the main concerns that students have when learning English?
Oh, goodness. I mean, what we were talking about before, Myra, was confidence. So that very much rings true for me, that it is a very common issue for students who are even testing at, higher B2 levels. C1 sometimes still don't feel confidence to speak. So that's a common problem. That's a common issue, I think.
Do you
Probably in
find that
Japan, I think even more than in other countries, but everywhere it seems to be.
do you feel that they are concerned with pronunciation, with having an accent?
That's an interesting one. Yes, and there's a lot of division in how people want to handle that, right? And
Mhm.
so for me, I find it very interesting because I think on the one hand, it's very important to understand what people are saying no matter where they're from. English is a global language, so we should try and adapt to understanding different accents. But also, there has to be some sort of idea of what's clear. Otherwise, what is the pronunciation of a word? How can someone say it in a way that another person can understand?
Mhm.
So that becomes very philosophical, as Lisana would put it too, right? Like you end up having these discussions. But I find that if I'm able to teach students, look, there are certain common factors. For example, the average native speaker will drop the sound when they say, for example, glass of wine. Often they will say glass of wine,
Mhm.
and that's common. Not just American speakers, British speakers, Australia. That's anyone who is proficient will tend to do that. And so knowing these kinds of things, I think, is helpful for listening, maybe more than for pronunciation, but
Right.
understanding that pronunciation is helpful.
Excellent. How do you feel teaching and or learning English has changed in the recent years?
Well, I'm sure you could answer that better than me. Goodness, for me, I'll just give a personal thing on that then. It's changed dramatically because I went from teaching 100% face-to-face to teaching 100% online. And there's positives and negatives with that.
Right.
But certainly I didn't expect it to be as positive as I found it. I went into it sort of kicking and screaming, thinking I miss the human connection. I want to be in a room with someone, and I've been surprised by how personal, Zoom means you're looking straight at someone's face, for example, in a way that you can't look away, that you can do in a group classroom setting. And there's so many exciting AI tools like we were talking about now that didn't exist just a couple of years ago. And that can be overwhelming. And sometimes it's scary that you feel, oh, I don't want this to replace the human touch. But I think if you use things like this strategically and you're, conscious of making it serve humans rather than take over from humans, I think it's an exciting time to be a teacher.
I totally agree. I have noticed that, just like you said, from being 100% in the classroom to not having the choice to be online, because many teachers had to learn how to use Zoom, for example,
Yeah.
or Meet or any other, video conference tool, and then other platforms and websites. And now AI has really taken off and everything is changing so rapidly that teachers, it is overwhelming for some teachers, especially the ones that are not so tech, they feel overwhelmed. And it's just not being afraid to learn, to just click away. There's no way that you can make a mistake. You can always undo something. Nothing will break. And especially with a child sometimes, or with teenagers or young adults, or even adults, they sometimes even know more than the teacher, and they are willing to help teachers learn how to use them. But
Yeah.
just like you said, having that balance of being able to use technology with the teacher is always helpful. You can't, or I haven't found something like 100% useful just on its own. I think that always having that human touch and having the teacher give them that feedback and just, like having them know that they are not alone is always helpful. And what I've told my students that are usually, like I said, I work one-on-one with my students now, uh, um, get a learning buddy, someone that you can talk with that is not a teacher, so that you can make mistakes and don't worry about pronunciation or word order, because it's okay to just have that confidence and fluency. And then you'll have enough time to go back to the books or to your teacher or to the app or whatever. And then you'll learn how to do it correctly. But just to have that confidence and that human touch, have a learning buddy. And
Yeah,
even
I
as a
couldn't agree more.
teacher, to have that buddy, that other person that will be with you along the way and will share their experience, like what we're doing right now with you girls, right?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Myra. I mean, language is communication, isn't it? And so that's what it's all about. And it's so interesting to me that when I go online, there's so often people who are searching for a native speaker to buddy up with, to become their study buddy. And I just think, what a waste of time. Just you don't need a native speaker to practice with. You just need somebody else who wants to speak English.
Exactly.
They don't even have to be at a higher level, as long as it's you're going to
Exactly.
help each other improve as you go, right? So
Yes.
yeah, it
Excellent.
really helps.
And
Yeah.
going back to AI, are there any websites or apps that you recommend?
Oh, a heap. So I'll try and narrow it down to some of my favorites. But we were just talking about study buddies. So you reminded me of one of my favorites is called Pi AI. I don't know the name of the website, but if you Google Pi AI, you'll find it. And it's a chat bot. So, similar to Chat GPT in that it's not specifically made for English learners. But what's good about Pi is that it was designed to be conversational. So if you're a higher level of English, and let's say you can't find someone who wants to practice English with you, then you can have a chat with Pi and it will ask follow-up questions. It's very supportive and very kind and very knowledgeable, obviously. So you can actually have a genuinely interesting conversation with Pi. So that one's good for practicing conversation, I think.
Excellent.
And another one that I strongly recommend is Glasp. This is a newer, smaller company, and I really want to support them because I think they're doing such a great job, and it should be more famous and popular than it is. This is the main thing I use it for is it will connect a YouTube video to ChatGPT for you.
Oh,
So if you are watching YouTube and you want transcript and a summary of that video, it will automatically summarize it and give you 5 bullet points about the YouTube video so that you can then decide, do I want to go back and watch the whole thing?
mhm.
But also, because you've then connected the two, you can type in questions into ChatGPT saying, what did that person say about this topic? And it will answer because it's got the transcript and it can read that for you. So that's useful for study, I think.
Some teachers are either for or against ChatGPT or any other similar AI tool. What is your point on that?
I think I'm in a fortunate position where I'm in a fairly low stakes teaching environment. So I can understand for people who work at universities, they've got very legitimate concerns about plagiarism, and that's not something I have to worry about, luckily. But I think in an ideal world, ChatGPT is a good brainstorming buddy. You know, like I use it to give me 20 phrases about I don't know, going to the shops, and it will give me, and I'll say, yeah, I don't like it. I don't like, oh, that one's good. You know, so it's not something that I will use to take what ChatGPT gives me and use it directly, but it does speed up the brainstorming process. It's not great for checking accuracy of things, though, is it? Have you found, like, if I want to really research something, I might start with ChatGPT and ask it some questions like, I don't know, give me 3 famous quotes from Abraham Lincoln, but I can't trust it. But I can start there and then take that quote and then go and research and find out, you know, on Google and look for sources to try and check if it's something to be trusted. So yeah, I don't know. How about you, Mayra? What do you think?
I do teach at university level, and I have caught my students using ChatGPT for their assignments. Even though I have run it through a plagiarism checker, it doesn't identify that it's ChatGPT, because now there are apps so that you don't detect ChatGPT.
Yeah.
So, but the easy way, I already know my students' level. I already know their vocabulary. I know their writing skills. So when I have them speak and write in class, and then they turn in a perfect assignment, that's
Yeah.
when it's like, I know that you didn't do this, right? And it's not because I want to catch them, like I caught you red-handed, but one easy way, because they know that I know, especially when I say, okay, can you start using the words that you used in your assignment? Or what does this word mean? Just to make sure. And then they start, you know, hesitating. And then they're like, yeah, teacher, I use ChatGPT. So, and I said, okay, so it's okay to use ChatGPT to get inspired or to give you ideas, but how would you paraphrase, you know, using your own words,
Yeah.
what ChatGPT suggested?
Yep.
And then they looked at it in a different way. And then they're not like, okay, I want to cheat. It's more like, okay, it's going to help me, because then I learn how to use the words correctly, or punctuation marks, or, you know, the syntax, whatever. And then they still have that challenge to have to use their own words or in their style, because every person has their own style in writing and speaking. So I do have some colleagues that say, no, Chad, I don't even want to learn how to use it. And I have others that love it.
Yeah.
And I have just, like, the only thing that I have done, like I said, is with my students, okay, use it, but paraphrase it, or use it just like as a prompt, or use it, but maybe to verify what you wrote, you know?
Do
But
you find that
you
you've
can
had to
tell, you
change?
can tell.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure. Like, have you
Mhm.
had to change how you set assignments? I'm so curious about this for people who work in universities.
Well, you do have to know before they actually start writing. What I do is I have them do it by hand. So kind of like a diagnostic test, I have them do, just like tell me something about yourself or tell me about your last holiday or vacation. And then when you read it, you can immediately detect their proficiency level, their vocabulary, their word order, their grammar skills, their writing skills. And then when they have to do an assignment, then you can put like, okay, you may use it for these things, or you can let them know. I let them know beforehand. If I see you use, or I suspect that you use an AI tool, I will not accept it, and then you will have to redo the assignment by hand. But when I was first like confronting in a polite and respectful way, then when even they say, no, teacher, really, I just consulted the dictionary for the translation of some words. And I said, well, it's not just the translation of the words, it's everything. And then when they saw what they wrote with what ChatGPT, well, their assignment that they had turned in, they saw the difference. And when they were speaking, that was like, okay, yeah, they had no other choice than to admit it. But
Yeah,
it's
that's
just like for
interesting.
them, letting them know that you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
That's
I don't have C1 or C2 level students. I have B2, B1, B2 level students. So it's easier to detect there.
sure.
Usually with C1 and C2 level students, if they use it, you can also detect it because of the word choice. Their range of vocabulary will be completely different from what they normally use.
True.
Mhm.
Although I wonder as ChatGPT develops how it's going to get harder and harder to detect, I'm sure.
Yes, because now there is one that even does it like like penmanship.
Oh, yeah?
Yes, which
Oh,
is
goodness.
that's even scarier because how could you like how will you be able to tell
Mm,
if it was artificial intelligence or if it was your student? But then
mm.
again, who's the one that's being tricked there? Are they tricking
Right.
themselves or are they really tricking us?
I
Right?
mean, it really brings the whole nature of assessment into question, doesn't it? It really makes you think like we're developing tests and like a machine is developing the test and a machine is answering the test and a machine is marking the test. It sort of becomes this crazy loop. There's
Yeah.
a guy on LinkedIn called Jason Gulia. I think I'll spell his name correctly. If any of you are on LinkedIn, I recommend you follow him. I'm finding him very insightful. He's an English professor at Berkeley University in the States, and he's marketing himself as the AI guy. So he posts always about how to use AI in education in a way that serves your students best. And some of the posts he's made have been about how he tries to set assignments including the use of ChatGPT, for example, where students must use ChatGPT as part of the process, but they
Wow.
have to take screenshots as they go and document. And so then they can prove, oh, this is what ChatGPT gave me, this is what I paraphrased, and these were the steps taken. So
And now APA format has already included how to cite when you use OpenAI.
oh, has it? I haven't kept up with
Yes.
that. Oh,
And
that of
that's
course they
even,
should. Yeah.
yes, I found that really interesting. So that way it will hold students accountable for using artificial intelligence. Because again, it's not a bad thing. It's just how you use it. And it's just being responsible in how you're using it, but teaching your students, that it's okay to use it, like everything, giving them the rules and the netiquette, right? The netiquette rules for using any kind of resource online. Yes.
Yeah.
If you were to give teachers tips for teaching right now in this 21st century with technology and just teaching English as a second language, what tips would you give them?
Oh, goodness. Oh, goodness. Well, firstly, don't be scared. I think we have a tendency to always assume that there is someone out there who knows how to do it better than us, and that there's some person who already understands all of AI and how to use it, and already understands all of the English language, for example, and how to teach it. And that person really doesn't exist. We're all just, chipping away at our area of it and doing the best we can. So I think, for example, grappling with how to use AI for your teaching, the best thing you can do is just jump in and start using things and testing it out, and trusting that you're not going to damage anyone or damage anything if you get it wrong, as long as you are transparent about what you're doing, and as long as you are, I'll backtrack on that, because again, I'm working in a very low stakes environment. Of course, if I was teaching students to write, if I was at a university where they have to be careful about plagiarism and so forth, then yes, there should be more care taken. But, if you're teaching someone to communicate and have a conversation, it's good to break rules. It's good to just try things and to just jump in, get your hands dirty, and see what happens, I think.
Excellent. And what about for learners?
For
For
learners?
students,
Yeah. You mean in terms of right now, or just generally?
in general.
In general? Yeah. Well, again, I think same advice. Don't be scared, just try. Just try and get back to that mindset of a child and play with the language and have fun with it. The more that we stress about trying to, learn a set of grammatical rules, for example, the harder it can be sometimes to express what you want to express, because you're trying to fit it into a box. Whereas if you go, oh, well, I'll try and say it this way, the response you get will tell you if you've used the correct grammar. So, I think taking a communicative approach always is a good thing to do.
That leads me to, what do you think is the best approach or technique? Is there?
Is there? Great question. For me, what works for me as a teacher, and there are a lot of teachers who I tremendously respect who do things differently. But what works for me and what I do, which is again focused on conversational English, I like a bit about the lexical approach of taking chunks of words together and using that to build upon. I think that helps a lot, because if you've got a bank of set phrases in your head, then they'll just come out automatically when you're trying to speak, rather than trying to structure things, which slows you down and you have to translate in your head. So that's one. Also, these days I'm very focused on micro learning. So my course, I try to give people, do 10 minutes a day, just do little bit. And then it doesn't become so overwhelming. And it also means you get that sort of repetition of things that you need as you move forward. But at the end of the day, I think the most important thing is always going to just be good old-fashioned communication, right? Like just talk to someone, check they understand you. If they don't, try again, just have that feedback loop that automatically happens whenever you're talking to another person.
Exactly. With what you said about micro learning or micro teaching, I gave an example recently that it's not the number of hours. For example, if you're going to study 10 hours a week, it's not the same 2 days to divide those 10 hours into 2 days. But if you divide those 10 hours in bits and chunks every day, maybe half an hour, or like in the morning, another half an hour or 1 hour in the evening, and just having that constant contact with the language, your progress will be a lot faster than if you just dedicate a day or two with the same number of hours. It's just like doing exercise. If you
Yes.
do a little bit every day, it's more effective than if you do one day a lot, you know?
Yeah, and I totally agree with that, but I also have to be honest and confess that I'm slightly ADHD, and so I know that it's not always easy for me to commit to doing
Yes.
my exercise, forget it, but like even study, doing 10 minutes a day. Sometimes I will do nothing and then I'll do an hour, 3 days later. And I think we all have to be kind with ourselves and just say, we do what we can do. Yes, there's an ideal though. I completely agree that it's ideal if you can do a little bit every day, then you will progress faster.
Yes. What about translation? Do you think that speaking L1 in the classroom is allowed? It's okay? Does it hinder the learning process or not?
That's such an interesting question. I've worked for the private sector for most of my teaching life, or owned my own business, and been at the mercy of my customers. So it's really, I've found, being a customer-driven decision, that in most cases they've wanted L1 to be banned from the class. So I felt very uncomfortable. When I was in Australia, I was working for a school with students from all over the world. And part of my job was to go around telling people, stop speaking Korean, stop speaking Portuguese, don't do that, don't do that. And I hated that because I felt that's just, people, they're adults, let them speak what they want. But the decision was coming from those customers, from those students. They wanted us to do that. And so it's a very complicated situation, I think. In terms of what's actually better for someone's learning, I can see an argument that it's probably better to try to immerse in the language, but at what level you're best off doing that is debatable. But let's say you've got a class of B1, why not try and have the language, the lesson in your target language? But when it gets to something very sticky and complex, then yes, maybe go off and use your first language if you can. But again, I'm also in a situation where I specifically try to have my classes be diverse. So they can't communicate in a common language except for English anyway, so it's more realistic than if you're teaching a class of all one, everyone speaks Spanish, then, they know it would be easier if they just, do the shorthand, speak Spanish. In my classes, they don't have that luxury. They have to figure out a way to negotiate meaning using English.
Right. I have found that at A1, A2 level, that the least amount of translation possible is better for them to learn to think in English, which is the hardest thing ever. And that once students are able to understand humor, like puns or jokes, then they are over that threshold. And then if they are past that tipping point, then when you translate or when they use L1, it's not going to interfere. and it won't be a problem anymore because it won't be like, oh, how do I structure or the word, or it's not going to get in the way anymore. But at the beginning, and it's not more like a prohibition, but it's more like the less you translate and the less you think in your first language, then the easier it will be to learn the second language. But it's not easy because then again, we also have different learning styles, and some people need the grammar translation method, which has been like the oldest method in language learning and teaching, right?
That's interesting. Yeah. I I find, having teaching in Japan, so many people rely heavily on grammar translation because that's really what the schools here really push. Well, not so much anymore, but certainly the adult learners that I were teaching, that's what they had gone through. And for most of them, the issue was trying to wean them off that style of learning, and then they would find that they preferred learning in a different style, but some of them needed a longer time to get there, right? Is that similar to what you
Yes.
find?
Yes, because each person is different.
Yeah.
And if they have different goals or needs, then their priority will be different. So then their effort and that immersion will be different.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yes, it is very debatable.
But it's interesting what you say too about how when students achieve a certain level, then they can communicate in their first language without it necessarily affecting the way they think in their second language. And I think there's just there's a lot to be said for that, isn't there? Because yes, it's important to have enough immersion so that you can communicate freely, but there are times when you need to step back and analyze as well. And so yes, it must be, I can see how it would be very valuable for your students, Mayra, to have a teacher who can speak both English and Spanish so that you can take both tracks with them
And
for
there are
that.
some things that don't have translation, and they
Yeah.
just have to understand it in the language, or you have to look for an equivalent so that it's easier for them to understand in, which is something similar to Japanese because their grammar and everything is completely different.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's amazing to me watching my son, who's now 9 years old, grapple with both languages. I speak to him in English, his father speaks to him in Japanese, and and the poor kid is very confused because I don't think it's as, like a lot of people tell me, oh, well, look at how many people in Europe are bilingual and trilingual and, just grow up using multiple languages. But I think it's so much harder to use Japanese and English. They're such different languages. The grammar, Japanese is subject, object, verb. English is subject, verb, object. So even that very fundamental part of the language is hard for a kid. And then when I studied German, I loved studying German because I felt like I could just guess and how do I say jump? I'll stick a g in the front and an n at the end, gespringen. Yes, it's correct. It's so simple. Whereas in Japanese, there's just no chance of guessing a word, right? Like you have to know it. And then don't even get me started on the writing system. 3 alphabets.
Oh my goodness.
So my poor son is learning 3 alphabets for Japanese and then a separate alphabet for English. It's yeah.
Oh my goodness. Before we leave, Evelyn and Lisana, do you have any questions that you would like to ask Pam or I or myself?
No, well, I had a question regarding to the barriers, but I think it just answered by itself when you were going with the conversation. I think the barriers can be personal and then they could go with the language itself because people can use
that they have a way to communicate either with their own language, but they also have they have their own style of communicating, especially in Mexico. We have people have their own style of communicating, depending in the area, the city they're living, etc. So it I think it kind of I was able to understand everything very well.
Yes,
I really appreciate.
personalized learning and teaching is, I think, easier than when you have a whole group or a group of 20, 30, 40, children, like in a school. Because when you are one-on-one, like giving either tutoring lessons or just English lessons on a personal level, it's a lot easier to adapt to their needs and to their rhythm and pace and everything. And then you will be able to detect those barriers and what works best for them and how to help them achieve their goals. But what about when it's in a classroom with 20, 30, 40 students? That's where it really becomes challenging, because we know that we have to have inclusion and we know that we have to make sure that we differentiate and that we are covering everyone's needs. But have you found that easier or more difficult, Pam, if with
I
larger groups?
I thank the Lord that I don't teach children because any teacher who teaches groups of 30 or 40 children, I have so much respect for you. I think it's really challenging. But I do teach large groups of adults,
Okay.
and I think there's a place for one-on-one personalized learning and a place for that kind of group learning as well. You're correct. Absolutely, you can tailor it and really address a person's needs when it's one-on-one. There's no substitute for that. But it's kind of like a party. I like my large groups because it's fun, and that's motivating. Motivation's important too, right? And
definitely.
it's great to be able to especially in these diverse groups that I'm setting up, where you can then meet people from different countries and you've got conversations about different cultures. Then that brings something to language learning, I think. But in terms of breaking through the barrier, as Lisana was asking about, my best trick on that is to try and focus on commonalities, or in this case cultural similarities. For example, it's great to have someone from the Middle East talking to someone from South America about what they have for breakfast and what they wash the dishes with, just really everyday common things, so that we can remember we are all human beings, instead of constantly focusing on what's different or what's a barrier.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Evelyn?
One thing I think you mentioned at the beginning was about, how often a challenge is maybe building that confidence in students. And as you were saying, in one-on-one it can be different to a bigger group, but what would be a tip or just sharing your wisdom on what's a good way to make sure that it's a safe environment, or like what are ways that we can make that a safe environment for learning the language for students? Or what have you seen? Yeah.
Shall I try first, Mayra?
Yes, okay.
Yeah. I think all the classic things that you will learn when you go through teacher training really do work, and we just have to go back to remind ourselves of those. So things like pair work and group work, it's so important I try to get the pair work happening as early in the lesson as possible. So sometimes I'll even skip going through introducing myself and setting up the objectives and things just so I can get straight to, okay, talk to the person next to you about this. And automatically they get more confident and feel, because they've got a buddy. So that helps, I think. And setting up classroom rules if you've got an ongoing class, I think, if you get everyone to buy in on what the rules are, that can be helpful. So I remember, when you were talking about English only in the classroom, these kinds of things, like I said, I always felt very uncomfortable when my boss said I must have an English only policy in my classrooms. So my way of handling that was to talk to my class and say, okay, what rules do we want for the class? And every time they said, we want an English only classroom. So I'm like, well, it's coming from you guys. Okay. So, in this case, and what do you want the punishment to be if you don't speak English only? And then we would have to get a majority vote on what that would be. And yeah, just things like this, I think.
Mhm. I completely agree. And especially with young learners, what I recommend is not putting too much pressure on that one partner, because they might feel like it's their responsibility to help the weaker student, because they are very fast on detecting, oh, I know a little bit more, or they are the weak one, and we don't want them to feel that. So
Yes.
make sure that you do vary how they pair up or they work in teams, and that each one has a responsibility without them really knowing how or why you are pairing them up like that, because we still have that responsibility of making sure that everyone, no matter or regardless where they are at, they have to have some improvement. So even if you have a mixed ability group, which you will always have, even if you have a placement test and you have them according to levels, there's still a spectrum. And so it will always be mixed abilities. But if you really have a mixed abilities where you have from A1 to almost C1 in the same classroom, that's where it's really challenging. And you could pair them up, the weaker with the stronger, but don't always put them like that, because you always want to make sure that everyone makes progress, even if it's little, but you don't want that stronger one to stay static because he or she is helping the rest.
Yeah.
Because it's not their responsibility. It's our responsibility to make sure that they are also, improving or perfecting and polishing their English skills. So it is tricky. It is.
But that's such a good point. And that also, don't you find that also helps with dynamics with regard to bullying or cliquiness or nastiness? If they're forced to be with different people all the time, they don't develop that cliquey kind of mentality.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we've come
Thank
to
you.
the end of our session for today. Hopefully, we can have one next year, anytime that you are free and willing, Pam. I really appreciate your time. And Lisana and Evelyn, thank you for joining us. And again, this is recorded so that we can share it with other teachers and learners. And I will put it up in our YouTube channel, and Pam is also going to share it. So again, Pam, if you can tell us your accounts where they can follow you.
Okay. Well,
Can
thank
you put
you
it in
very
the
much.
chat?
Yeah, I'll just type it in Neo English with Pam on anything. So if
Anything and
you,
everything, because you're
yeah,
everywhere.
I'm trying. So probably the Facebook is the one that, allows for the most interaction.
Yes.
And but YouTube is the one I'm trying to grow. Facebook and Instagram are growing quite nicely. So anyway, I want to just say thank you, Mayra. It's a real pleasure to meet you, and thank you for setting this up. And Evelyn and Lisana, lovely to meet you too. And I wish you guys all the best in your journey. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you,
Thank
Mayra,
you.
and blessings to all. Have a happy new year, everybody. Thank
Yeah.
you very much
Yeah.
for the moment, for the tips and everything. Thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you. Happy